Hello and welcome. Brett here with ClickMill.co. In this video, we are going to be talking about the decision-making model of asymmetry. So I'm going to share my screen with you here, and we're going to go ahead and get into this one. Okay, so asymmetry, and you're going to see on the screen, you're going to see a kind of a weird shape. And we're going to talk about this in a moment. But first, what asymmetry means, it's just, I believe, a mathematical term that simply means not symmetrical or not even. So they do not equal each other. So, 3 is not equal to 10. That would just be asymmetry. There is, asymmetrically more, numbers on the 10 side than on the 3 side. That's all that means. And so we have sort of 3 ways we can see asymmetry. We can put in, and this is going to be our input, and we're talking about a system. Your ministry, your business, your life is a system. And when you put something into it, the question is, what do you get out? And so obviously we're still asking those questions. God, are you telling me to do something completely miraculous that sounds crazy, and then go through kind of the spiritual tests? Well, secondly, it's going to be, is it biblical? Is it in line with the vision? So now we're testing fruit under the is it fruitful category. Is it in line with the vision? That's going to filter out 99% of decisions, and that's going to free you up. You're going to be bored for a while until you start getting fruit, because is it in line with the vision is just going to slow everything down, but it's going to make sure you're only getting the growth in the right areas that God's called you to. Now here, this is going to make sure the things within the vision, so you can see this is even a smaller subset, are fruitful. So this here is your input into the system. I am going to input a resource. And now we've talked about resources in the earlier videos. This is a resource. It could be time, energy, finance, attention, decision-making, like any of these things that we talked about. And I'm going to put one of these in. And so on the bottom end of the line here, I'm losing. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I invest a resource. I do not want to lose more than I put in. And that sounds really obvious, but this is something that especially Christian ministries have a hard time with, but definitely new entrepreneurs as well. Once you start in entrepreneurship, once you start making a profit, you can definitely start saying like, oh, okay, this is a problem. And then that usually gets cleaned up after, a few years of experience. In ministry, there isn't quite as much what we would call profit incentive, because we say, well, it's not about the money, it's about the kingdom, and it's about the, sharing the gospel, and how much is that even worth? And so, and I agree with that. It's not about those things. At the same time, if I were, and I have done this, by the way, I haven't done it this way, but I have run advertising accounts. If I'm running a church advertising account, and if you're a ministry leader, let's say, or even an entrepreneur, and I'm running your advertising account, and I take $1 for you and I lose you $100, how long are you going to keep me on the payroll? Not very long, because that is like the worst stewardship ever. You're giving me one resource and I'm taking it, and I'm taking 100 more from you. That's a bad deal. And so we can say all day long, it's about the kingdom. It's not about the numbers. It's not about the money. But if I continue to use money in this way, you're not going to have a ministry. So it clearly has something to do with money. There is at least a filtering mechanism here to decide what is good stewardship. So the first thing you want to do when you're considering the mental decision-making model of asymmetry is to make sure that you do not have asymmetric losses on the downside. Okay, so don't put in one resource and then have a huge loss of resources. Just don't ever do that. That's the first sort of prudent, wise way to make decisions. If you do this in any area of your church, it can really hurt you. If you do this in all the areas of your church, you're just not going to have a church for very long, or a Christian business as well. So coming over here next, we're looking at the next kind of variant of this. Okay, now this would be a symmetric. So this is not asymmetric. This is just symmetric. I'm going to center it. I put in one resource. So I cut off one resource to get one more resource. So maybe I sacrifice one time and it brings in $1, or, I put in one attention and then I get one time back, something like that. you don't really want to do this either. This is definitely better than the losing. We don't want asymmetric downsides, but this has no asymmetry. I'm just shifting around. It's like, hey, um, I'll give you a nickel if you give me 5 pennies. Well, that's the same thing. It's ultimately this transaction wastes time because you just changed resources, but you took time to do it. So you ultimately wasted time and got no growth. So we don't want to be here, because I guess if you think about it, if I give you $1 and you give me 100 pennies, that transaction takes effort and it takes time itself. And so even though I got the same result, we spent 5 minutes counting your pennies and then shifting it around. So we're still losing resources in this, just not directly. And so the next thing you want to do is avoid uh, symmetric exchanges, I guess is what you would call this. Don't put one in and they get the same amount out. You want to get more out. And this is important in the Bible. Why? Because which soil produces the asymmetric upside, the good soil? All the seeds die in all of the soil except the good soil. Well, that produces an asymmetric growth rate. Well, what about some of the seeds? Well, some seeds will come up and produce 160 and 30 times what was sown. Why is that important? Because they're producing kingdom fruit that is asymmetric. God put one seed in the ground, or the planter put one seed in the ground. God provided the growth, and then that person brought forth 100 times what was sown into them. So even the Bible is interested in asymmetric growth from a kingdom perspective. Okay, so coming over, what does that look like? This is how you want to set up your ministry or your business. And now it does not have to be 100 here, but you build this over time. So you put in a certain number of resources, one, for example, and then you want to have the highest return you can. And so, for example, maybe we just have like, we put $1 into, again, this is just an example because this can go for business or ministry. You put $1 into your advertising account, and then whatever comes back, whether it's a church congregant who tithes to your ministry, and again, ministry leaders tell me consistently, it's not about the money. And you're right, it's not. However, if you got more money coming in because people were coming in and tithing more than you spent, couldn't you go then and reach more people? You could go reinvest the increase to go and reach more people and help more people. So it's kind of a little bit important, and we should definitely at least make an increase. And breaking even is not, I mean, I guess maybe that's the very minimalist break even. But if you could make an increase, just make the increase. In the case of Christian businesses, if you're a Christian business owner and you love Jesus and you want to help people around you and run a godly company, well, if I'm being frank, so long as it's within God's will and it's in line with your vision, because this is actually how I assess these things, I hope you have as much money as you can handle without straying from your faith or, having affect your character in some way, because you can then take that and then positively influence your community and give people a reason to be Christians. And that's money. But what about time or energy? I hope that if you're watching this, you're putting in 1 energy and getting back 100 energy so that you can get out there. These are all just tools to be used to glorify God and reach people in the kingdom. So again, an increase in abundance in this whatever resource that's coming back is just a tool to be used. And so long as you have the character to use it, which is the hope of anyone in this course, and you do not allow that tool to corrupt you or allow it to help you, what do you want to say? If you have $1 million, then I get to show who I am through my use of $1 million. Well, hopefully you really have your character together, and then you can show who you are with that extra time you got back, or that extra money that came in, or that extra energy that you have throughout the day. And so we want to invest our ministry resources in an asymmetric fashion. Okay. And when you do this, and I want to show you how this works. When you do this and you say, we're no longer going to accept anything that's unbiblical, well, that kind of just makes you a serious Christian. And, we're always working on that. We're no longer going to accept anything unbiblical. Now you're only doing godly things. Then we're no longer going to accept anything outside the vision. Well, now you're just doing the things that God has called you to. So now you're only doing biblical things in the direction that God has you going. Well, that's going to take you in the direction God has you going. So now that's great because you can do really good things going in completely the different direction. Well, we're going to have a surfing ministry and you're going a different direction than God. And this might be like, and like what we might call an Ishmael. Sarah, I may butcher these names, so please forgive me. Sarah said to Abraham, well, hey, take my maidservant because I'm too old to have kids. And he's like, okay, God was going to provide in one way. Abraham is doing his best in his own understanding to try to bring that promise to fulfillment. But in the process of maybe not making the best good decision there, he went off in a different direction. And now there's, this whole nation today that's Islam that comes out of that decision. That's maybe what we call an Ishmael. It's you're trying in your own work to do something that God is supposed to be doing. And so in this case, you're going after the vision and there's no Ishmaels. You're only going to be moving in the direction and getting the fruit that God has for you. And then you're only going to do the things that produce an increase. And so now you're not stagnating toward the vision. You're actually growing toward the vision. And so you can see, even with just these three models, you can guarantee that you're only going to grow toward the vision. Now, one thing I want to point out, this could mean in your business or ministry that you're already cutting things out. And you might even in your mind, you'll be like, well, that means this has to go and this has to go. Good. Get rid of them. Those branches are not useful if they don't meet these requirements. And not only that, those branches are soaking up your resources that could be put to the one tiny little sprout that's going to produce all the fruit. So you want to prune with care, but you also want to prune everything that doesn't match this. And, generally that's the case. Occasionally, maybe there is a exception, but you got to be careful with those because you don't want to let the weeds in the garden. You don't want to let the thorns grow in the garden, this kind of thing. And so you want your resources to flow through to the very few things. Well, what the great news is that means you're supposed to do less stuff. If you're super stressed because you're trying to do everything, you're doing it wrong. You're supposed to do less stuff and hone in the direction God has for you and just stay there until something works. Okay, now I'll add one last thing. If you're looking and you're like, whoa, that means we're going to basically have to prune everything, I would recommend for shock factor, you consider how quickly you prune it. Okay, because if you just go and you just, amputate all the limbs at the same time, you can die from shock. Right. Okay. Well, then the income does go to zero and then we're totally out. Okay. So firstly, the disease has spread so far that if you get rid of it all at the same time, it'll kill you. That's a big problem. So what you have to do is you have to say, what are all the things that need to be cut? And we're going to start cutting them and we're going to cut this big one. Ministry or business, you may need to withdraw, not directly cut because people panic and, this is what the church is about. This is your business. This is the biggest service, whatever. They can freak out. Well, just withdraw attention, just withdraw energy and just slowly start sapping away the resources until it starts to wither. People start to move into other areas of your ministry or business, and then just sort of remove it in the cover of night, disappear it. And that's okay. And then do that systematically until all of those, we might say non-vision oriented branches, non-fruitful branches, non-biblical branches, hopefully that's not there, but either way, those are all gone. And you do that slowly to help people and your organization acclimatize to the new system. You can do that in serious cases. But if you're small, I recommend, in many cases, you just cut it and just get it over with. It's going to hurt. Rip off the Band-Aid, cut the thing and move on. So thank you for being here. If you have questions or thoughts on asymmetric decision-making, please leave them in the comments. I look forward to hearing from you. This is one of my favorite ones because if you just make sure you're just getting a little bonus, a little extra in every area of your life, you'll never be, barring some kind of calamity that's outside your control, you'll never be you'll never be in this position that you're in now. You'll always be in a more abundant position, both emotionally, spiritually, relationally, financially, and all of these other ways. So be the type of person who can say, Lord, you gave me 5 and I gave you 5 more. Here you are. Let's be those people. We can choose to be those people. And I look forward to seeing you in the very next video. God bless.